If I'm not mistaken, Nvidia is already releasing their 10th 30 series graphics card. There's no 3090 Ti in the table yet, and two 3080 variants are marked as one. A big lineup so everyone can choose which GPU they want. Some want 3070, some want 3060, I want a jetpack to be like CJ. Now you're allowed to want a 3050, the most affordable GPU with RTX in its name. But don't expect good ray tracing performance. The main feature of this release is likely to be DLSS, technology that allows you greatly increase FPS at cost of slight drop in graphics quality. And judging by rumors, a lot of cards will be produced. Nvidia is trying to build a large supply, apparently to combat the GPU shortage. Well, I guess it works. So MSI sent me an RTX 3050 Gaming X, big thanks to the company. The same day it arrived, I made a post on the community page asking what you were curious about. And there were so many wishes, and overclocking, and 1440p resolution, and PCI Express 3.0, it all will be there. I'm wondering about the other thing, how to take it. Nvidia suggests not making anything up and comparing it to past models with the end of 50, 1650, 1050, 950, like that. Basically, why not? The company has been plus-minus consistent in shaping its lineup. Those were budget cards for people who can't spend much on something powerful and are ready for compromises. New single-player games will run about 30-40 frames per second at maximum settings, but some sort of Dota and World of Tanks will give a really good FPS. The recipe hasn't changed much in the last 10 years. The price is under $150 except for two cards. TDP is around 70 watts, so manufacturers can put small and cheap coolers, or even produce variants without additional power, making the whole system cheaper. And the amount of memory is without any reserve at all. RTX 3050, $250, in Europe it's 280 euros, so even more expensive, 130 watts, 8 gigs. Interesting. Let's accept the fact that the company has destroyed its own structure in the GPU lineup, and now the buyers are confused. Let's accept the fact that in terms of price, the company has stepped into GTX 1660 Ti territory, the card that is clearly not for budget computers. The bigger problem that is every dollar of the recommended price is now multiplied by 1.5 or even 2. This is easy to check. I open Amazon and look. GTX 1650 costs at least 70% more than it should. The cheapest offer starts from $250, but usually we're talking about $300. It's a similar story with RTX 3060, overpaying more than twice as much. The other cards follow the same logic and 3050 is no exception. Right now it's selling about $450 and it better be worth its money. If not, if its recommended price is inflated by, say, $50, the real buyer will overpay almost $100 or even more. About months ago here in Ukraine it cost around $600. For a budget video card it's a real pain. But according to YouTube channel Hardware Unboxed, the gap between MSRP and real-world prices are lowering and the problem becomes less noticeable. In a video description I'll leave links to check out current prices, and by shopping through them you'll support my channel. And now it's important to me because due to war in Ukraine I must leave my home. I'm from Kharkiv. Also I have Patreon. Thanks. It's already clear that Nvidia is lying. From a budget GPU there's only the name and it would be strange to ignore it further. I'll treat it as a mid-range segment where the 1660 Super used to be. I don't have it on hand, but I do have
1660?
No, much more better, 2070. I don't have any other GPUs, but both it and the 2060 Super and 3060 perform about the same. There are minor differences, but overall at Full HD resolution all show very close results. Each of the models deserves the title of minimum level for comfortable gameplay with ray tracing. My tests show this. Here it is with the 2060 Super, here it is with the 3060. Here is respected media saying the same thing. Here are other channels comparing the cards directly, and there are small differences between them everywhere. So take your gaming results at the 3060. From them you'll able to see if it makes sense to overpay a quarter of the price. And also I have one test with 1660 Super in a Tomb Raider. To use it, I need to turn off ray tracing, but put the heaviest anti-aliasing. Ouch. So there's not much difference between the cards? So the old card is $20 cheaper and as fast as new? Especially if you build a PC with the PCI Express 3.0. I won't jump to conclusions yet, we've only seen the results of one game. But here is the side note. If the game has no RTX or DLSS and the gap between 2070 and 3050 stays the same, it's likely, most likely, the 3050 is a drop faster from 1660 Super. All tests will run on this computer. The main thing here is the presence of PCI Express 4.0. The rest of the components are also enough for a card to work properly. The 3050 from my video is MSI Gaming X, a nice board capable of holding good temperatures without making a lot of noise. Without overclocking and in a poorly ventilated case, I haven't seen temperatures above 62 degrees. And it's clear, for a card with 130 watts TDP, such a big cooler is a bit too much. By raising the frequencies, the chip was warming up to 64 degrees at most, a great figure for a company's top-of-the-line model. By the way, overclocking. From what I've seen on the internet, 3050s are able to take 2100 MHz or even higher. My particular card took 2130, and Afterburner allowed me to raise more than 1 GHz in memory, TDP plus 7%. With these parameters will be the data from overclocking. In Cyberpunk, for example, it helped a couple of times. Now the game runs without RTX and DLSS, as it would be running on GTX 1660. As for me, the frame rate under 40 is perceived as jerky. After that, it's less noticeable, and it's just the edge that overclocking is gaining. To be honest, I'm not impressed by 3050. The card with a real price around $500 struggles even in Full HD, not to mention 1440p. Technically, it's not for those conditions, but considering how much it costs now, you can imagine that if a person has paid so much for a GPU, a good monitor can appear there too. By this point, some of you already want to ask the question, why don't I use ray tracing? Who the hell with an RTX GPU will not use its main features? Well, a lot of people won't, there are enough questions out there, but Cyberpunk is the perfect case. Look, I turned the ray tracing preset on Ultra and DLSS on Quality. Now, even at 1440p, it's something to play with. Full HD gained only 4 FPS, but gained. What is happening on the screen now is that both the picture quality and FPS are getting higher. DLSS doesn't drop the sharpness enough to negate the benefits of RTX. If you throw in overclocking, it turns out really good. 45 FPS on average after driving through the game's heaviest locations, it's a good result. And in case you want the best smoothness, there is also an option to disable RTX but leave the DLSS. Bam! 56 FPS without overclocking. It's very comfortable to play considering it's a single player game. I think most people will leave RTX on at Full HD to get the most beautiful picture, but at 1440p the option will be disabled. From my perspective, RTX card shows zero reaction on the ray tracing option in Warzone, so the test will pass with it. At max settings the 3050 brings out good smoothness. If you want, you can lower the graphics to get even more frames per second, cause not every gamer will be satisfied with 80 FPS for a shooter. Warzone becomes the first game that has DLSS, but I deliberately leave it off. The technology frankly ruins the picture, and from my observation, no one uses. Besides, it's not much use anyway, because pretty quickly the emphasis on the processor comes up. Probably this is the only game where I'm not sure that Ryzen 3600, even with overclocking and fast dual rank memory, will let their graphics card work at full power. If I had 5600X or something from 12th generation Intel, it could be a bigger number in FPS count. With the 1440p, CPU will definitely be enough. Whether that much FPS is enough for you is another question. If you stay in Full HD, the 3050 handles racing well. Both NFS Heat and Forza 5 are able to run smoothly with beautiful graphics. Only in the case of Need for Speed, you can just turn everything to maximum and enjoy life, while Forza may need to reduce a couple of settings. I tested with all sliders to maximum and 2x anti-aliasing. Racing games require responsive controls, and I'm not sure if 50 FPS would be enough. By the way, here's some food for thought. There are 3 metrics with RTX 3050, all plus minus within the same limits. There's no case with straight up lags or freezes, and incremental steps of only 3 FPS do not weigh much. But come to think of it, the difference between 50 FPS and 56 FPS is already noticeable, and it's up to 3050's owner to decide if it's going to be like this or like that. First, at the purchase stage, when the PCI Express on the motherboard is selected, and then at the setup stage, when overclocking is applied. In 1440p, the nuance is even sharper. 41 and 46 FPS are noticeably different from each other. By lowering the settings, you can get a smooth picture in both cases, but this is better, right? For the past 3 months, I've been really hooked on Escape from Tarkov. Great game until you turn on max settings. There are few places that greatly reduce FPS and do not affect the picture. That is, you can literally raise the frame rate up to 50% and the visuals do not suffer. I play so, but for the sake of purity of the experiment, I simulate a case when a man bought a new graphics card and for the first time in his life decided to put everything on maximum. On average for the entire run, even 40 FPS is not gained, and in a particularly abnormal place, frame rate drops as much as 20 in Full HD. Tarkov is clearly underperforming. Maybe an early driver is to blame, maybe something else, but the gap between 2070 is abnormally high and this behavior is found only here. Anyway, I don't recommend leaving the max settings at 3050. After spending a couple of seconds manually tweaking it, I played for a week straight, occasionally noticing FPS drops below 50. Usually it was around 70. As opposed to Tarkov, Apex went great. Map is edge of the world, more than 100 frames per second with smooth frame time. The overclocking at just a little bit, and the overall power reserve should be enough to play the game with 1440p monitor. Although it's better to cut a couple of settings. I'll focus on 2 more games and the rest will go in the background. Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, a version of the game with improved ray tracing and a second generation of DLSS. Along with Cyberpunk, Metro can be framed and finger pointed for all to see. The game works as a great advertisement for the 3050 because it uses all the key advantages that 1660 Super doesn't have. Ray tracing improves the picture quality and DLSS keeps FPS high. The third version of PCI Express barely affects performance, and switching to 1440p leaves a playable level, especially with overclocking. On a desert map, the frame rate is likely to drop below 40. Well, for a couple of hours you'll drop the settings by 1 notch. Otherwise, great result. On the other side of the scale is God of War. Full HD, less than 40 frames. Overclocking helps just a little bit. 3050 is hard to handle maximum settings, and personally, I would sacrifice on visuals just to improve smoothness. The 1440p is quite sad. Technically, the game supports DLSS, and magic's supposed to happen, like in Cyberpunk or Metro Exodus, but not this time. As in Warzone, the technology blatantly ruins the game. The image gets significantly softer due to reduction of resolution, and to compensate for that, it seems that DLSS applied a large radius sharpening filter. A similar effect occurs if you put the fastest response mode on your gaming monitor. That is how badly DLSS is implemented. Maybe I can be okay with it, but the FPS barely increases. Enabling the quality mode, I gained only 6 frames. For my taste, they are not worth it. Even the most aggressive upscaling algorithm will add just a fraction of smoothness. Just forget it. The rest of the games will go well. I don't see the point in talking through each one, I'll leave them in the background. I'm still worried about something else. How do I feel about the RTX 3050? Throughout the video there are 2 different attitudes inside, good and bad. Let's start with the positive. The RTX 3050 is a good card. Most of the games I've looked at are capable of running smoothly and beautifully at Full HD resolution. There are a couple of exceptions where you need to lower the settings, but in general, after some GTX 650 or integrated graphics, the buyer will get a really good device. With some compromises, after a year or two you can forget about max settings, but compared to some Radeon 6500 XT, it's on another level. A lot of things are better than 6500 XT, to be honest. People with high-resolution monitors need to think. Dota and CSGO will run flawlessly, but heavy games can create difficulties. If there's no DLSS, you already have to lower the settings. A bit further, I'll show the results from work applications, and they are good. Applying overclocking, the card is not far behind from RTX 2070, but for me personally, it wouldn't be enough. The 3050 is incapable of running my color correction in real time, only 18 to 20 FPS. To be fair, all I need to do is to lower noise reduction just a little bit. In this case, the card will be fine. When building a computer with RTX 3050, make sure the system supports PCI Express 4. Without it, the card is underperforming by about 5%. Not a big deal, but with it and with overclocking you'll get a nice boost, especially considering that it's way past the time when motherboards with PCI Express 4 were expensive. Now the price premium is very small. At last, if you have a choice for the same money to take 1660 Super, 1660 Ti or RTX 3050, definitely 3050. There is more memory and the ability to enable DLSS. There is another point of view, less rosy. Nvidia is not making any breakthroughs. In fact, we already saw such a GPU 3 years ago, called the 1660 Ti. $30 more expensive and just a few percent faster than the 1660 Super. It was just forgotten about after the lineup update. What I'm getting at. The 16 series graphics cards were the same RTXs but with ray tracing turned off. What if 3 years ago, in addition to the familiar 1660 Ti, Nvidia released it again, but with ray tracing, and call it an RTX 2050, priced at, say, $320. No one would understand it. Even the 2060 suffered from lack of performance, so they had to release the 2060 Super to revive sales. Now what has changed? Why now, 3 years later, a 1660 Ti with ray tracing will be understood? Because there's more games with DLSS. The technology doesn't always work well, sometimes it only spoils the picture, but games are appearing and the further you go, the bigger the list becomes. And I have no problem with such an idea. On the contrary, I think it's cool. And here, and in cheaper products. Right now, the Nvidia Quadro T400 is very popular. It's a budget card built on the same architecture as 1660. It has the same price as the GT 1030, but is a bit more powerful. That is where people get upset when they find out that DLSS doesn't work. But how great it would be! Consider an office plug able to play Cyberpunk or Tarkov when DLSS get there. That's a great idea. That's a cool idea. I have a problem with the way Nvidia is marketing the 3050. The company brags in every way about how cool the cheapest RTX is. Show graphs where GPU tears up its predecessors, without specifying that it compares with cards cheaper in 1.5 times and almost 2.5 times. And for some reason using a simple 1650, a card so bad that the company had to improve the performance twice to make its purchase really justified. First they sped up memory, then they make the 1650 Super. Approximately there's about 40% difference for almost the same price. And what is this? Comparing performance in ray tracing against a card that can't even turn it on. 1060 is the lowest card that can even turn it on. They are using 1050. What's going on there? Why don't I play the same game? That's how a 3050 loses in acceleration from 0 to 100 against a 40-year-old Lada. Here's how many dudes it can haul. Here's a graph of the number of cylinders. And in the valve count chart, the 3050 just blows it out of the water. Take the Lada, you won't regret it, because judging by my graphs, it's infinitely better. And unlike Nvidia, I'm comparing devices with about the same price. Okay, let's discard the jokes. Now the charts are not so impressive, especially considering the price. The approximate state of affairs will remain in other games when there's no RTX or DLSS, and these are majority. And as a result, in 3 years of progress, for about the same money you'll get 2 extra gigs and rare opportunity to enable DLSS. Remember, 1.5 years ago, when the 3000 generation first came out, Nvidia claimed it was the biggest leap in performance in the company's history. The 3070 was fighting against a $1,000 card. The 3080 was setting a new standard that no one had ever dreamed of, while costing a lot, but everyone understands what they are paying for. The old generation looked ridiculous against them. In 1.5 years, we went from there to the point where we should be glad that at least we remained at the same level. After all, when the 3070 came out, they had to release breakthrough products, and now they can release any, and they still will be bought. AMD's 6500 XT is a good example of that. But only unlike AMD's card, Nvidia released the good stuff. The 3050 is a great GPU, just overpriced. And in a good way, if the same thing gets MSRP of 180, okay, $200, I take away the claims. Because for 10 years in a row, the company has successfully made budget cards. Every time got a good performance boost without much change in price. And somehow at the moment, when there's no budget cards at all, and most needed some inexpensive solution, Nvidia was like, no. Please understand me, it's not about $50, it's about 100 to 150 bucks in some regions. It will cost after all the markups. That is, a real buyer will overpay as much money for which he could have bought an Core i3, simply because, in my opinion, the card is overpriced. And I also don't believe that under normal conditions the 3050 would came out as it does now, with 8 gigs, 130 watts and the ability to play with ray tracing. In my imaginary world, where Nvidia has built in logic in their own products for years and then not jumping out for short-term profit, the 3050 would be weaker and therefore even cheaper. And that's where the DLSS would really be the main feature. It's just now profitable for the company to make higher-end products. Why sell cheaper devices when you can sell them at a higher price? People will buy them anyway. Makes sense, right? And I'm under no illusion that Nvidia is a relief fund. It's a giant business whose goal is to make money. If I were them, I might do the same thing. It's just that I read somewhere that their idea of the 3050 is to help gamers regain interest in gaming. As of early 2022, 3050 barely helps. But it's good. Good mid-tier card, not the budget one.